I want her out of this hospital right now. Do you hear me? Fire her!
I want her out of this hospital right now. Do you hear me clearly? Fire her this very minute, because I am not here to play games with anybody tonight.
Mrs. Holloway, please, I was only trying to help your daughter. I swear, I meant no harm at all. I was just doing what I was told to do.
I don't want to hear any explanation from you. You touched my daughter without my permission and went against what I said, so you are finished in this hospital.
Mrs. Holloway, I understand that you are upset and angry, but Nurse Diane was only following the standard protocol for patients. She was not trying to disobey you.
I don't care about your protocol at all. My husband donated $3 million to this hospital, $3 million, and I will shut this whole ward down before morning.
Yes, I understand what you are saying. Please, just try to calm down a little. We will handle this situation immediately as you have requested.
I only wanted to make your daughter comfortable and safe, Ma. I did not mean any disrespect at all. I would never go against you on purpose.
Enough of your crying. Remove her from my daughter's room now and make sure she is out of this hospital before I lose my patience completely.
Good. That small problem has been handled. People need to learn that they cannot cross me when it comes to my child, not even in this place. Sleep well, my dear. Nobody will touch you without my permission again, because Mommy is right here watching over you closely. All that drama over something small, honestly. These people like to make simple things look like big trouble for no good reason. It was just a minor inconvenience, nothing serious at all. By morning, this whole night will mean absolutely nothing to me.
Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. Stories like this one don't end the way you expect. To understand how we got to that hospital hallway at 2:47 in the morning, you have to go back to the beginning. You have to understand who Margaret Holloway was. And more importantly, you have to understand what she had done to get there. Margaret Holloway had grown up with nothing. Not a little bit of nothing. Real nothing. The kind where you eat plain rice for dinner 3 nights in a row and pretend it's fine. The kind where your shoes have holes in them but you stuff newspaper inside and keep walking. She grew up in a small, crumbling town called Delford, in a house that smelled like mold and old cooking grease, with a mother who worked double shifts at a laundromat and a father who had left before Margaret could even form a clear memory of his face. From the time she was 7 years old, Margaret made herself one single promise. I will never be poor again, and she kept that promise. She was smart, sharper than most people gave her credit for, which was something that both helped her and filled her with a cold, quiet anger. She studied harder than anyone around her. She got a full scholarship to a good university. She studied business. She was ruthless in the best and worst ways. She networked, she climbed, she pushed, and she never once looked back at Delford. By the time she was 32, she had married Richard Holloway, a kind, soft-spoken man who had inherited a very successful pharmaceutical company from his father. Richard was good-hearted and gentle in all the ways Margaret was not. He loved her deeply, in that quiet, patient way that some people love, like a steady candle rather than a roaring fire. Margaret loved him too, in her own way, but more than Richard, more than the company, more than the mansion in the hills or the charity galas or the designer clothes, Margaret loved Lily. Lily was her miracle. That was the word the doctors had used when she was born, because Margaret had suffered 2 miscarriages before Lily came along, and with each one, something inside Margaret had gotten a little harder, a little more closed off, a little more brittle. She had cried in private. She would never cry where anyone could see her, and then she had stood up, fixed her face and kept going. But Lily changed something. When Lily was placed in Margaret's arms for the first time, tiny and pink and already looking up at the world with wide, curious eyes, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Something warm and terrifying and completely out of her control. She felt soft. And Margaret Holloway did not like feeling soft. Soft was dangerous. Soft got you hurt. Soft got you left behind in a moldy house in Delford with newspaper in your shoes. So she turned that soft, overwhelming love into something she could control. She turned it into protection. Lily grew up in a bubble. A beautiful, expensive, suffocating bubble. She went to the best private school in the city. She had a personal tutor and a music instructor and a swim coach. She ate organic everything. Margaret researched every single thing that went into or near her daughter's body. Every vaccine, every vitamin, every ingredient on every label. She fired the first nanny for giving Lily a piece of store-bought candy without asking. She fired the second nanny for letting Lily play in the mud. Richard worried sometimes. He would say gently, carefully, "Margaret, maybe we should let her just be a kid sometimes." And Margaret would look at him with those cool, steady eyes and say, "She is a kid. She is my kid. And nothing is going to happen to her." Richard would nod quietly and let it go, because that was how they worked. Lily herself was a sweet girl, bright and funny and kind in ways that seemed to skip a generation from her mother. She loved animals and drawing and making up silly songs. She called her father Daddy Roo, because of a game they used to play when she was 3. She had her mother's sharp eyes but her father's gentle heart. She also had a condition called supraventricular tachycardia. It was a heart condition, a fancy name for a problem where, sometimes without warning, her heart would suddenly start beating incredibly fast. Way too fast, like a hummingbird trapped in a cage. Most of the time it wasn't dangerous. Most of the time it could be managed. But it had to be watched. It was on a Tuesday in late October when Lily had her first serious episode in 2 years. She had been at school, sitting in her art class, painting a picture of a horse, when her heart suddenly took off like a rocket. Her face went pale. Her paintbrush dropped. Her teacher, Miss Reeves, saw her sway in her chair and rushed to her side. By the time the ambulance arrived, Lily's heart rate was at 210 beats per minute. Margaret had been in the middle of a board meeting when her phone rang. She looked at the caller ID. She stood up without a word, walked out of the room, and answered. She was at the hospital in 11 minutes. Anyone who knew Margaret would not have been surprised. She had once driven 40 minutes in 22 minutes because Lily had a fever of 103. The doctors at Crestview were calm and professional. They got Lily stabilized quickly. Her heart rate came down. She was admitted for monitoring, and the medical team was confident that with the right adjustments to her medication, this kind of episode would be much less likely to happen again. Lily, once the scary part was over, was actually in good spirits. She was propped up in her hospital bed eating orange jello and asking her father to do his terrible impression of a pirate, which made her giggle in that way that lit up the whole room. Margaret sat beside her and watched her daughter laugh, and felt that warm, terrifying softness rise up inside her again, followed immediately by the iron grip of control. She flagged down the attending physician, Dr. Carson, and asked for a full list of every nurse who would be assigned to Lily's care. Dr. Carson blinked. "Mrs. Holloway, our nursing staff is highly—" "The list, please," Margaret said. She got the list. That night, things were going smoothly. Lily's numbers looked good. Richard had gone home to get some sleep after Lily made him promise not to stay up all night worrying. The ward was quiet. The night shift had come on. The nurse assigned to Lily's room was Diane Marsh. Diane was 28 years old. She had graduated at the top of her nursing program. She had been working at Crestview for 4 years and had never once received a complaint. She was the kind of nurse who remembered her patients' names, remembered what they were scared of, remembered to check in just a little more gently on the nights when someone seemed anxious. She was, by any honest measure, an excellent nurse. She came into room 412 just after 2:30 in the morning to do a routine check on Lily's 4-line and her cardiac monitor leads, the small sticky patches attached to Lily's chest that tracked her heart rhythm. One of the leads had been showing slightly inconsistent readings, and Diane wanted to check the placement. She was very gentle. She was very quiet. She was trying not to wake Lily. But Margaret wasn't sleeping. Margaret was sitting in the chair in the corner with her eyes open in the dark, the way a guard dog sits, still but never truly resting. She watched Diane cross the room. She watched her reach for the monitor lead on Lily's chest. And something in Margaret, something that had been wound tight for decades, snapped. "What are you doing?" Diane turned quickly. "Oh, Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry. I didn't want to startle you." One of the leads was showing some irregular. "Don't touch her. I just need to check the placement. It's completely routine." "I said don't touch my daughter." Her voice was low, cold, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. Diane lowered her hands. She tried to stay calm. "Mrs. Holloway, the lead needs to be repositioned. If we don't get a clean reading on her cardiac monitor, we could miss. She is sleeping. You are not going to stick things on her chest while she is sleeping without my direct permission. I did not give that permission. You will step away from my daughter right now." Diane looked at the monitor. She looked at Lily. She looked at Margaret. She made a choice. She reached for the lead anyway. And that was when Margaret stood up and walked into the hallway and screamed for a supervisor. What happened next, you already know. Gerald came. Gerald caved. Diane was escorted out. The lead was never repositioned. The monitor kept showing its slightly inconsistent reading, which the overnight staff, now one nurse short on the floor and assuming the previous staff had noted it as non-urgent, quietly moved to the bottom of the checklist. Margaret sat back in her chair beside Lily's bed. The room was quiet. Lily's chest rose and fell in the soft, steady rhythm of deep sleep. Margaret watched her and felt that familiar feeling. The fierce, possessive, desperate love that had driven every decision she had ever made about this child. Every fired nanny. Every researched ingredient. Every late-night argument with doctors who thought they knew better. She was protecting her daughter. She was always protecting her daughter. She closed her eyes. At 6:12 in the morning, a sound came from Lily's bed, or rather a silence. A different kind of silence. Margaret opened her eyes. The heart monitor beside Lily's bed had changed its rhythm. It was no longer the steady, reassuring beep 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 she had been listening to all night. It was something else now. Something faster. Something wrong. Margaret stood up. Lily. Lily's face had gone the color of old chalk. Her lips had a faint bluish tint that Margaret had never seen before and that her brain refused to process for one long, terrible second. Lily. She grabbed her daughter's hand. It was cold. Lily's chest was barely moving. Margaret spun toward the door and screamed. Not the controlled, furious scream of a powerful woman getting what she wanted. This was a different scream entirely. This was the scream of a mother. Somebody help. Somebody please help my daughter. She's not breathing. The door burst open. Nurses flooded in. An alarm went off. A cart came crashing down the hallway. Someone yelled code blue, room 412, into a radio, and the words hit Margaret like a physical blow to the chest. She was pushed back against the wall as hands moved over her daughter. Voices called out numbers she didn't understand. Equipment appeared from nowhere. Margaret pressed her back against the cold wall of the room she had fought to control all night long, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had absolutely no power at all. The last thing she saw before she was gently but firmly guided out of the room was the face of the charge nurse leaning over Lily, and the charge nurse's eyes were focused and fast and afraid. The door swung shut. Margaret stood alone in the hallway, and the world, her carefully controlled, fiercely protected, perfectly managed world, went completely and utterly silent. The hallway outside room 412 felt like the loneliest place on earth. Margaret Holloway stood with her back pressed against the cold wall, her silk robe still wrapped around her, her hands hanging at her sides like they didn't belong to her anymore. She could hear the sounds coming from behind that closed door, urgent voices, the sharp beep of machines being adjusted, the squeak of shoes moving fast on the floor, and every single sound felt like a needle going straight into her chest. She had been in control her entire life. Every room she had ever walked into, she had owned it. Every conversation, every negotiation, every argument. She had always been the most prepared, the most determined, the most powerful person in the space. But right now, she was just a mother standing in a hallway, and her daughter was on the other side of a door she wasn't allowed to open. Her legs gave out. Not dramatically. Not in the way you see in movies where someone crumbles to the floor in slow motion. It was quiet and small. She just sort of slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor of the hospital corridor. Her knees pulled up, her expensive robe pooling around her, her face buried in her hands. She didn't cry. Not yet. She was too scared to cry. Crying felt like giving up and she was not ready to give up. So she just sat there, shaking, and waited. A nurse passing by stopped and crouched beside her. Young face, kind eyes. She put a hand on Margaret's shoulder and said, "Mrs. Holloway, let me take you to the family waiting area. You don't have to sit on the floor." Margaret looked up at her. "Is she going to be okay?" Margaret whispered. The nurse's face didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. Just barely. Just enough. "The team is with her," the nurse said carefully. They're very good. Let's get you somewhere to sit. The family waiting room was a small, beige room with chairs that were too stiff to be comfortable and a coffee machine that hummed too loudly. There was a painting on the wall of a field with some flowers in it, the kind of painting that was chosen specifically to not upset anyone, so generic and bland it barely existed. Margaret sat in one of the stiff chairs and stared at the coffee machine without seeing it. She called Richard. The phone rang 3 times. Then his sleepy voice came through, warm and soft the way it always was when he first woke up. Margaret? It's barely 6 in the morning. Is everything? Come, she said. Her voice cracked on the single word. Come right now. It's Lily. There was a pause. One single heartbeat of silence. And then she heard the rustle of sheets and his feet hitting the floor and his voice, completely different now, tight and awake and scared. I'm coming. I'm already coming. Talk to me. What happened? She tried to explain. The words came out in pieces. The monitor, the lead, the reading, the color of Lily's face, the door closing. Richard listened without interrupting. She could hear him moving. Keys jingling, a door opening, the sound of cold morning air. I'm in the car, he said. Stay on the phone with me. Richard, she stopped. I'm here. I think I made a mistake, she said. The words came out strange and small, like something she had never said before, because she hadn't. Not like this, not out loud. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then, tell me everything when I get there. Right now just breathe. Okay, just breathe. It was 41 minutes before Dr. Carson came into the waiting room. Those 41 minutes were the longest of Margaret's life. She sat with Richard, who had arrived in 19 minutes, which told you everything about how fast he had driven, and he had taken both her hands in his the moment he walked in and hadn't let go since. He didn't ask questions. He didn't say anything. He just held her hands and sat beside her, and that was somehow exactly what she needed, even though she would have told you on any other day of her life that she didn't need anything from anyone. When Dr. Carson walked through the door, both of them stood up so fast their chairs scraped the floor. Dr. Carson was a compact man with silver hair and steady hands and the kind of face that had delivered news. Good news and terrible news. So many times that he had learned to keep it perfectly still until he was ready to speak. He was still now. Margaret's heart hammered. Lily is stable, he said. Margaret's knees went soft again. Richard grabbed her arm. She's stable, Dr. Carson repeated. She had a significant SVT episode. Her heart rate spiked very suddenly and severely, and her oxygen levels dropped quickly. That's why her color changed and why her breathing became so shallow. He paused. But we caught it. The team responded fast and we were able to get her heart rate down and her oxygen back up. She's resting comfortably now. Her numbers look much better. Margaret let out a breath she felt like she had been holding since 6:12 in the morning. Can I see her? She asked. In a few minutes, Dr. Carson said. I want to speak with you first. The way he said it made her stomach tighten again. She sat back down. Richard sat beside her. Dr. Carson pulled a chair close and sat across from them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, the way people sit when they're about to say something important and they want to make sure you're really listening. Mrs. Holloway, he began. The episode Lily experienced this morning was serious. It happened very quickly and her levels dropped faster than we would typically expect. He folded his hands together. Part of the reason we were not able to catch it earlier, before it became as severe as it did, is that her cardiac monitor was not giving us a fully accurate reading through the night. Silence. One of her leads had shifted, he continued, his voice steady and careful. It was showing slightly inconsistent data. Our overnight team noted it and intended to address it, but due to some staffing challenges on the floor last night, it didn't get corrected as quickly as it should have. He looked at her, not with accusation, not with anger, just with that steady, honest gaze that Margaret suddenly found very difficult to hold. The nurse on Lily's case, Nurse Diane Marsh, flagged the issue at approximately 2:30 this morning and attempted to reposition the lead. Had the lead been corrected at that time, we would have had clean data through the rest of the night. We would have seen the early signs of this morning's episode building, possibly a full hour before it peaked. and we would have been able to intervene much sooner and much more gently. The room went completely quiet. The coffee machine hummed. Margaret stared at Dr. Carson's folded hands. I understand, Dr. Carson said gently, that there was an incident last night that resulted in Nurse Marsh being removed from the floor. It was not a question. Margaret didn't say anything. Richard looked at her. She could feel his eyes on the side of her face. I'm not here to assign blame, Dr. Carson said. I'm telling you this because you deserve to understand the full picture of what happened to your daughter. And because, he paused, choosing his words with care, because I have seen situations like this before. Parents who love their children fiercely, who want to protect them from everything. And sometimes, in trying to protect them from everything, they accidentally remove the very protections their children need most. Margaret's jaw tightened. I know that's hard to hear, he said. Yes, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It is. They let her see Lily 15 minutes later. She walked into room 412 slowly, which was not how Margaret Holloway did anything. She walked through life at full speed, always forward, always in control. But she walked into that room slowly, like she was afraid of what she might find. Even though she already knew Lily was okay. Lily was propped up against her pillow, looking pale and tired but awake. There was an oxygen cannula under her nose, 2 small prongs delivering a gentle flow of air, and her cardiac monitor was showing a clean, steady rhythm now, every lead perfectly placed. When she saw her mother come through the door, Lily's face did something complicated. Crumpled. Mommy, she said, and she hadn't called Margaret Mommy in at least 2 years, because she was 9 and she had decided 9 was too old for Mommy, which Margaret had secretly been a little sad about. Margaret crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped both arms around her daughter and held her, very carefully, mindful of the wires and the cannula and everything attached to her small body, and then she stopped being careful and just held her. I've got you, Margaret said into her daughter's hair. I've got you. I'm right here. Lily made a small, muffled sound against her mother's shoulder. Richard appeared in the doorway. He saw the 2 of them and pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. Then he walked over and wrapped his arms around both of them, and the 3 of them stayed like that for a long time while the heart monitor beeped its steady, reassuring rhythm, and the morning light began to come through the window. Later, much later, when Lily had fallen back asleep and Richard had gone to get coffee and the room was quiet, Margaret did something she had never done in her adult life. She asked a nurse for help. Not demanded, not instructed, not managed, asked. The nurse who answered the call button was a woman named Patricia, who had been on the morning shift. She was older, probably mid-50s, with practical shoes and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. When she came in, Margaret was standing by the window, looking out at the city below, her arms folded around herself. Is there something you need, Mrs. Holloway? Margaret turned around. And there it was, that thing that almost never happened. Margaret Holloway, who had fired nannies for giving her daughter candy, who had made a night supervisor fold like paper, who had built a life out of pure iron will, had tears running quietly down her face. I need to ask you something, Margaret said. Of course. The nurse from last night, Diane. She paused. Does she still work here? Patricia studied her for a moment. Nurse Marsh is on administrative leave while the incident is reviewed, she said carefully. Margaret nodded slowly. She turned back to the window. She was right, Margaret said. Came out flat and quiet, and it clearly cost her something. She was trying to help my daughter, and I stopped her, and she was right. Patricia didn't say anything. She just waited. Is there a way for me to... Margaret stopped. Started again. I don't know how to fix this. You could start by talking to hospital administration, Patricia said. Telling them what you told me. Margaret wiped her face with the back of her hand. A quick, almost impatient gesture, like she was annoyed at herself for crying. And if I did that, if I told them it was my fault and not hers, would she get her job back? I can't promise you that, Patricia said, but it would go a long way. Margaret sat with that for the rest of the morning. She watched Lily sleep. She watched the heart monitor, Lily watched it this time, not with suspicion or the need to control it, but with gratitude. Every clean beep was a gift. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before. She thought about Diane, 28 years old, standing in this room in the middle of the night, trying to do her job, trying to do the right thing, and Margaret had pointed at her like she was an enemy. She thought about all the people she had pointed at over the years. The nannies, the teachers she had interrogated at school conferences, the doctors she had second-guessed and the specialists she had dismissed and the neighbors and staff and assistants she had steamrolled in the name of doing what was best for her daughter. She thought about her own mother, working doubles at the laundromat in Delford, smelling like detergent, always tired, always stretched thin, and how hard she had worked to make sure Lily never had to live the way Margaret had lived. And she thought about how, in all that fierce, relentless, iron-fisted protecting, she had sometimes protected Lily from the very people who were actually on her side. It was a terrible thing to realize. But Margaret Holloway had never been a person who looked away from terrible things. She was a person who looked them dead in the eye and figured out what to do next. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, she walked into the office of the hospital's head of nursing, a woman named Director Huang, and sat down across from her desk. Director Huang looked at her with carefully neutral eyes. "Mrs. Holloway, I was expecting to hear from your lawyers." "No lawyers," Margaret said. She placed her hands flat on her knees. "I'm here to tell you that what happened last night with Nurse Marsh was my fault. All of it. She was doing her job correctly. I interfered. I made a scene. I had her removed from my daughter's care. And as a direct result of that, my daughter nearly died this morning." She said it straight. No softening. No excuses. Director Huang was quiet for a moment. "That is not easy to admit," she said finally. "No," Margaret agreed. "It isn't. What are you asking for, Mrs. Holloway?" "I'm asking you to reinstate Nurse Marsh," Margaret said, "with full back pay for any time she's missed. And I want it on the record that the complaint against her was made in error, in my error, and that it should have no impact on her record or her career." She paused. "And I'd like to apologize to her directly, if she's willing to hear it." Director Huang looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll reach out to Nurse Marsh this afternoon," she said. Diane Marsh came to the hospital the next morning. She almost didn't come. She had been at home for 24 hours, still in her scrubs when she first got back, unable to quite believe what had happened, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold because she kept forgetting to drink it. She had cried. She had called her mother. She had wondered, for the first time since she chose this career, if maybe she wasn't cut out for it after all. Then Director Huang had called. And now she was standing in the doorway of room 412 with her hands tucked into the front pocket of her new scrubs, looking at Margaret Holloway, who was standing on the other side of the room beside her daughter's bed. Lily was awake. She looked at Diane with curious eyes. "Are you the nurse Mommy was mean to?" Lily asked. "Lily," Richard started. "It's okay," Diane said. And then, despite everything, she almost smiled. "Yeah, I am." Lily considered this seriously. "Mommy said she was sorry to you in the office. Did she say it nicely?" "Lily, please," Margaret said. Diane did smile this time. Just a small one. She did. She said it very nicely. Lily nodded, satisfied. "Good. She practiced in the bathroom first. I heard her." Richard covered his mouth. His shoulders shook. Margaret turned slightly pink in a way that was entirely new for her face. Diane took a breath. She walked into the room. She stopped a few feet from Margaret, who stood up very straight the way she always did when she was nervous, though most people couldn't tell the difference between Margaret nervous and Margaret confident. They looked almost identical from the outside. "Mrs. Holloway," Diane said quietly. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said. "A real one. Not the kind people give when they're trying to avoid consequences. The kind where I actually mean it." She paused. "I was wrong. You were trying to help my daughter and I treated you like you were her enemy. You weren't her enemy. You were exactly what she needed, and I couldn't see it." Her voice dropped. "I'm sorry, for what I said to you, for what I cost you, for all of it." Diane was quiet for a moment. She had thought about what she would say if this moment ever happened. She had imagined feeling angry, or cold, or triumphant in some small, justified way. But standing here, looking at this woman, this fierce, brittle, terrified woman who had spent her whole life building walls around the thing she loved most and had almost lost it anyway, Diane mostly just felt tired, and a little bit sad, and something else she hadn't expected. She felt understanding. "I know you were scared," Diane said. "I could see it. Even that night, I could see it wasn't really about me." She exhaled slowly. "I accept your apology." Margaret closed her eyes for just a second, opened them again. "Thank you," she said, and it was quiet and genuine and nothing like the way Margaret Holloway usually spoke. From the bed, Lily held out her hand toward Diane. "Do you want to see my drawing? I drew a horse. Daddy says it looks like a potato, but I think it looks like a horse." Diane laughed. Really laughed, the tension in the room breaking like a window letting in fresh air. She walked over to the bed and looked at the drawing Lily held up. It was a crayon horse on a piece of hospital notepaper. It did, somewhat, resemble a potato. "I think it's a great horse," Diane said. "See," Lily said to Richard. "I stand by potato," Richard said. Lily went home 4 days later. Her medication was adjusted. Dr. Carson sat with both Margaret and Richard for a long time, going through everything, what to watch for, what the new dosage would do, when to call, when to come in. Margaret asked questions. Good ones. She took notes. She did not once question Dr. Carson's expertise or suggest she knew better. It was a small thing, but Richard noticed. He didn't say anything about it, but she caught him looking at her once with that quiet, steady warmth in his eyes that had always made her feel like she was doing okay, even when she wasn't sure she was. She squeezed his hand under the table. He squeezed back. 3 weeks later, Margaret did something she had been avoiding for 31 years. She drove to Delford. She didn't tell anyone she was going. She just got in her car early on a Saturday morning and drove the 2.5 hours to the small, tired town where she had grown up, and she parked on the street outside the house she had grown up in. Still there, still a little crooked, the front porch sagging slightly more than she remembered. She sat in her car for a while. She thought about the little girl who had grown up in that house and made herself a promise. I will never be poor again. And she had kept it. She had more than kept it. But somewhere along the way, the promise had grown extra edges she hadn't intended. Extra sharpness. It hadn't just protected her from poverty. It had made her afraid of anything she couldn't control. Anything that could be taken away. Anyone who might get too close to the things she loved. Including the people who were simply trying to help. She sat in front of that house for a long time. Then she drove home. She stopped at a bakery on the way and bought a ridiculous number of pastries, the kind with too much sugar and chocolate drizzle that she would normally never allow in the house. And when she walked through the front door, Lily came running down the hallway in her socks and nearly crashed into her. What's that? Lily stared at the box. Terrible food, Margaret said. Completely nutritionally worthless. Enough sugar to make your teeth sad. Lily's eyes went huge. Can I have some? Margaret looked at her daughter, healthy and bright-eyed and home, her heart beating exactly the way it was supposed to, and she felt that softness again. That warm, terrifying, completely uncontrollable thing. This time she didn't try to put iron around it. You can have 2, she said. And don't tell your father. He'll want 3. Lily took her 2 pastries and ran back down the hallway, and Margaret stood in her entryway for a moment with the bakery box in her hands and the sound of her daughter's laughter bouncing off the walls of their house. She took a breath. Then she followed her daughter down the hall. Some things she was learning, slowly, imperfectly, the hard way, the way she had always learned everything. Some things could not be controlled, could not be managed or researched or optimized or protected into safety. Some things you just had to hold gently and trust. And that's where we leave the Holloway family. Not perfect, not fixed, but finally learning the difference between protecting the people you love and trusting the people who love them too. If the story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Every subscriber helps us keep bringing you stories like this one. Thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one.